there's one commander strategy I have found that works better than any other, it is to be Jog, or just a widow guy. Jogging is all about having a low threat level at the table, managing that, keeping it down, and keeping the aggro going between the other three players. If you find just a widow guy to be too gendered, you can also go with just a widow gal, or in the case of today's commander, just a widow NB. That makes today's commander a John, which also makes our commander from Philadelphia.
Clap your hands, everybody, for Philadelphia.
I went to Philadelphia and that's the only picture I took. And also, that picture wasn't even in Philadelphia. It was in Hershey. Today's commander I hardly know is Delney Streetwise Lookout. They're actually pretty popular in the 99 of a lot of decks, but not a lot of people are running them as a commander, and I'm not totally sure why. I do have a few theories. Obviously, theory number one, people don't like playing monocolored commanders as much as they like 2 or 3 colors. You have less options.
I think you're better than me.
I am better than you.
The good thing is, white has been appropriating every other color's identity for like the past 10 years, so you still kind of get all the stuff you need from the other pieces of the color pie, maybe just not as good of versions of it. Another reason I think Delney might be too flexible, so people can't decide what they want to do with them. They're a jack of all trades and a master of John. Let's read the card to explain the card. So Delney is a 2/2 for 3 mana, but they make little dudes with 2 power or less unblockable by creatures with power 3 or greater, which most of the time means they're either unblockable or they're gonna trade. The extra neat part though is that if an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, it triggers a second time. It makes sense, because all the bigots out there surely got triggered twice when Delney was announced to be a they/them causing May/hem.
Yeah, well, guess what?
Philadelphia.
We'll start off talking about lands, and you might think, okay, 35 copies of Plains? No, there's a myriad landscape.
How original.
And a temple of the false god.
Daring today, aren't we?
Another one I have in here is Rogue's Passage, in case you really need to get in with something, and they do have 1/1 or 2/2 blockers. Windbrisk Heights just gets you a little bit of card advantage. You're gonna have a pretty huge board with this deck, so the hideaway cost of having 3 or more creatures attack is gonna be incidental. I did also add Crystal Grotto for a scry and Path of Ancestry for potential scry. There are 10 other humans in this deck. If you don't think that's enough to justify Path of Ancestry, just cut it for another Plains, it's fine. And then Mirix and Karn's Bastion. Mirix lets you pay 3 mana to make a 1/1 Phyrexian with Toxic 1 that can't block, and Karn's Bastion proliferates.
Wait a minute!
This isn't a toxic deck. I'm John. I'm John! So Panharmonicon is a card we're gonna throw in here. It doubles up ETB effects. ETB effects are triggered abilities, which means you would get 4 triggers of any enter the battlefield ability if you have Delney and Panharmonicon out there. NB and Pan, what a pair. And we've got a nice suite of ETBs. Wall of Omens and Spirited Companion are gonna draw you a card. Oh wait, I'm sorry, 2 cards. Oh wait, you have Panharmonicon? I meant 4 cards for 2 mana.
What you got there?
It's a smoothie.
Where are you gonna get a better deal than that? Solemn Simulacrum will ramp you so hard, putting 2 lands on the battlefield when it comes in and drawing you 2 cards when it leaves. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant 4 lands if you got Panharmonicon out. And then still 2 cards when it dies. Panharmonicon doesn't do anything for dying. Recruiter of the Guard lets you tutor for any 2 power creature you want. There's only 1 creature in this entire deck with power 3 or greater. Oreskos Explorer will also make sure that you have lands, letting you search your deck for a plains if someone has more land than you. Oh, sorry, I meant 2 plains. Oh wait, sorry, I meant 4 plains. Having this card in the deck actually kind of incentivizes you to want to go 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. I mean, probably 2nd, because that means someone else is probably gonna have hit their land drop before you, so you can get this out and fill your hand up with the lands that are in your deck, so they're not in your deck, and you're more likely to draw heat. Thraben Inspector and Novice Inspector are the same card. It's 1 white. You investigate when they enter the battlefield, and they're both 1/2s. The only difference is Novice Inspector is considered a detective and not a soldier.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
Because detective wasn't a creature type until Karlov Manor. That's it. Boy, Karlov Manor. That was a set. Got Delney, got the Guacamole, From the Fallout set, we've got Commander Sofia Degari. I think that's how you say it. I don't know. I don't remember what game she's from. But she's not your commander just because she has commander in the name. However, she can destroy other people's commanders, destroying a legendary permanent when she enters the battlefield. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant for if there's Panharmonicon out.
Another happy landing.
Also from Fallout, and maybe one of the best win cons of this deck, Gary. Gary has Squad, which means you can pay extra mana when you play Gary to make copies of Gary. But because Squad is also an enter the battlefield effect, you actually get 2 copies of Gary for every time you squad him, or 4 if you also have Panharmonicon out. When Gary attacks, he gets +1/+0 for every other Gary on the battlefield, except again, if you've got your commander out Delney, that's going to be +2/+0 for every Gary on the board. When you start doing the math on this, if you have some extra mana late game, you can make a huge army of Garys. It is worth noting these Garys can be blocked. They don't count as creatures with power 2 or less after they are attacking because their power goes up, so they don't get the can't be blocked effect from Delney. But if they all attack at the same time, they all get the bonus effect doubled up from Delney. Does that make sense? Werefox Bodyguard and Annex Sentry will both blink out a permanent. Annex Sentry specifically targets an opponent's permanent. Werefox Bodyguard can target one of your permanents if you want to blink that ETB. Also, Annex Sentry has Toxic, but like this isn't a Toxic deck. Don't worry, it's not a Toxic deck. I wouldn't make a Toxic deck. I'm John. Now there's also a lot of triggered abilities that aren't ETBs on creatures. Charismatic Conqueror can slow down your opponents or give you a board state. When an artifact or creature enters under an opponent's control, they can choose to tap it. If they don't tap it, you get a 1/1 vampire with lifelink, which is pretty hard to block for you. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to 1/1 vampires with lifelink. I'm gonna stop doing that bit. I think you all understand. The triggered effects are doubling. That's the point of the deck. Esper Sentinel is another one that's really expensive. Honestly, Esper Sentinel, Charismatic Conqueror, and Delney are like 80% of the cost of this deck. But of course, there are also staples that will go great in any deck that has white. Probably. Esper Sentinel lets you draw a card when someone plays their first non-creature spell on their turn if they don't pay X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. Most people don't really want to pay it, and if they don't pay it now, you get to draw 2 cards. Codsworth is an interesting one here. Giving commanders you can control Ward 2 is the reason it's here, because Ward is a triggered ability, which means that Delney would have Ward 4. It's a great protection piece. The other stuff of moving auras and equipment isn't really important. There's only one equipment or aura in this deck, and that's Rogue's Gloves. Rogue's Gloves lets you draw a card when a creature hits someone. Delney makes it easy for creatures to hit someone, and that would be attached to the 1 or 2 power creature you have, so you'd get to draw 2 cards. That's the only equipment in here. Codsworth is mostly here to protect Delney. Soul's Attendant and Soul Warden are the Soul Sisters. You get 1 life when a creature enters the battlefield. Pretty standard. You get 2 life instead. Suture Priest is kind of like that, but they also deal 1 damage when an opponent plays a creature, which is 2 damage. Suture Priest gets nasty with Delney. It really pisses people off. Welcoming Vampire lets you draw a card when a creature power 2 or less enters the battlefield. All your creatures are 2 or less. It says this ability triggers only once per turn, but are you sure about that? Because Delney makes it trigger a second time. It's a way to get around that rule. Rumor Gatherer lets you scry 1 when a creature enters the battlefield. If this is the second time that ability is triggered, you get to draw a card, which I don't know if that means that you would go to draw a card or if you would scry 2 and then the second time it would happen you would draw 2 cards. Either way is good. If it's scry 1, then draw a card, that's good. If it's scry 2, then draw 2 cards, obviously that's better. Whatever it is, it's good.
Something might happen here, and if it does, so what?
Flump lets you draw a card and choose another player to draw a card when it takes damage. It's a 0/4. If anybody has like a 1/1 token, you can play some politics to both draw 2 cards. Everyone likes to draw cards. You just get to draw more. It's a really diplomatic way to play, which reminds me of Mangara, the Diplomat. With that on the battlefield, you get to draw a card when someone casts their second spell a turn, which is 2 cards for you. And if 2 or more creatures an opponent controls attack you, you get to draw 2 cards. People don't like it when you draw cards. This might make them leave you alone. We also have Baird in here. Baird isn't really something that pairs with Delney. It's just another stacks piece that makes people pay 1 more mana if they want to attack you. We want people to not attack us because remember, we are John.
Papa John!
Grateful Apparition lets you proliferate when it deals combat damage to a player. I guess that's proliferating twice, but this isn't a toxic deck. This isn't a toxic deck. I'm John, okay?
I don't believe you.
And those are the 22 creatures in the deck. Might seem a little low for a Creatures Matter deck, but oh well, you know, I guess that's where we're at. One thing I like about Delney is they are so very, very flexible. You can run so many different strategies. This is kind of a generic, good, power 2 or less triggered abilities thing. There's a lot of different things that kind of work a little bit with each other, and you can kind of tune the deck to how you like it to be. You can definitely do like a blink flicker kind of thing. You can do a life gain thing with more Soul Sisters in there, like the new Guide of Souls. That's not what we're doing. We're just kind of doing generic John. But we're also going to blow up the entire board if things don't go our way. Dusk blows up all creatures with power 3 or greater, which works for you because that keeps your board state alive and blows up everyone else's. Then it has an Aftermath ability you can play from the graveyard, which returns all of your creatures with power 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. That's all your creatures, except for one. That's a 3/4. Wait, I didn't talk about that creature. I wonder why. Expel the Interlopers lets you choose a number between 0 and 10. Then you destroy all creatures with power greater than that number.
Think of a dream alone.
Your board's fine, everyone else's board is dead. Battle of the Bywater. Good for that water. It destroys all creatures with power 3 or greater. And then you make a food token for each creature you control, which is fine, but again, we're doing asymmetrical board wipes because we're bad people.
What you got there?
It's a smoothie.
Mass Calcify destroys all non-white creatures. All your creatures are white except Solemn Simulacrum, but that lets you draw 2 cards.
Oh, somebody kill me, please!
White Sun's Twilight is unfortunately not asymmetrical. You pay X and 2 white. If X is 5 or greater, you destroy all creatures, and you gain X life, regardless. And make X 1/1 Phyrexian Might tokens that have toxic and can't block. This isn't a toxic deck! At some point, the table might think, you're not John.
I have done nothing wrong, ever, in my life.
In which case, you need to put your shields up. Brave the Elements gives white creatures you control protection from any color until end of turn. Condemn puts a target attacking creature on the bottom of its opponent's library because you said not to attack you, and they should have listened. Eerie Interference prevents all damage that would be done to creatures you control. Mana Tithe is a crappy counterspell. It makes someone pay 1 more if they want to cast a spell, but if you notice someone's tapped out and they're messing with a board in a way you don't like, hit them with the Mana Tithe. They won't be able to pay it, and they'll be screwed. Rebuff the Wicked is a counterspell, but it only works if someone is using a spell to target a creature you control. People kind of want to get rid of Delney when they're on the board, which is so unfair. They're so John. Rootborn Defenses populates. There are a few ways to make tokens in this deck. I think we've probably talked about a few of them. It also makes creatures you control indestructible until end of turn for White Sun's Twilight, or any other board wipe that hits the board, or just any amount of a lot of people swinging at you for some reason when you're so John. Swiftfoot Boots, they're Swiftfoot Boots. They give a creature haste, they make it hexproof, so people can't target it. And then Norn's Decree gives a creature a poison counter whenever they attack you, and whenever anybody attacks someone with a poison counter, they get to draw a card. Now, I know you're thinking, okay, this sounds like it's a toxic deck. You're getting a lot of toxic effects. But this is just to disincentivize people from attacking you. And then if they did attack you, it incentivizes other people to attack them instead, to leave you alone because you're so John. You're not playing a toxic deck. You're John. But what if there are threats on the board you actively want to get rid of? Well, White actually has a pretty great removal suite. Generous Gift destroys a target permanent and gives that player a 3/3 elephant, which is kind of insult to injury on this one, because that 3/3 elephant can't block any of your shit.
Don't you want to open your present?
If it's a
3/3 elephant.
I'm gonna be very upset.
Get Lost destroys a creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Its controller gets to make 2 map tokens, which might as well be toilet paper.
My bottom's been saved. Woo-hoo!
I have never seen anyone use the map tokens. Swords to Plowshares exiles target creature. Its opponent gets to gain life equal to that creature's power. And Path to Exile does the same thing, but they look for a land in their deck instead of gaining the life. These are like the standardist standard white removal spells. Stroke of Midnight is a lot like Generous Gift. It destroys a non-land permanent, and the controller creates a 1/1 white human creature. Unfortunately, that can block you, but it's like a 1/1. Who cares? As far as playing all these spells, you're going to need some mana. I've mentioned Solemn Simulacrum and Oreskos Explorer already. But, you know, Soul Ring also helps. Pearl Medallion will discount your white spells by 1 colorless mana, and Octera's Monument will discount your creature spells specifically by 1 colorless mana and let you create a 1/1 warrior with vigilance as you do so. It's really great for the Soul Sisters, but also discounts in general I think are better in monocolored decks than something like a Mind Stone or an Arcane Signet, because those discounts apply to multiple spells you'll cast every turn, rather than just 1 mana every turn. And they're comparable in mana cost. Though I guess if we have to have a mana rock, why not, I don't know, maybe like Glistening Sphere? When it enters the battlefield, you get to proliferate. And then you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, probably white, I would say. Also, if someone has 3 or more poison counters, you can tap it for 3 mana of 1 color.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
There's some other cards in here we should probably talk about. There's a little bit of Recursion. Helping Hand lets you bring a creature back from the graveyard if it has mana value 3 or less. That includes your commander. It only costs 1 mana, so it helps keep Delney coming back to the board even when people blow them up. Speaking of ways to bring Delney back, Court of Ardenvale. That makes you the Monarch when it enters, and if you're still the Monarch on your upkeep, you can return a creature of mana value 3 or less to the battlefield at your upkeep. If you're not the Monarch, you can still put it in your hand. At the very least, you're getting around commander attacks, or you can just swing in with stuff that has ETB effects, like Solemn Simulacrum, and force people to either take the extra damage, or they kill it, you draw 2 cards, and then it gets to come back and bring you more lands. Get the lands out of your deck, so you're more likely to draw heat. Assemble the Players is a little bit of card advantage, letting you check the top card of your library, see if it's a creature with power 2 or less, and then you can play it from the top of your library. It's specifically really good in this deck. And finally, Skrelv's Hive creates a 1/1 Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1 that can't block, you lose 1 life, but if you have one of the Soul Sisters out, you'll gain 2 life. If you have 2 of the Soul Sisters out, you'll gain 3 life minus that 1 life you lost, and if you have the Suture Priest out too, you'll actually gain 5 life at the beginning of your upkeep and make that Toxic Might. This might be a toxic deck. Let's stop kidding ourselves. It's a toxic deck. I'm not John.
I've been here the whole time.
Yeah, here's the deal, gamers. I haven't seen anyone else make a toxic deck with Delney. There's a lot of the blink, a lot of the life gain, but I think toxic is the best way to go. Sure, you can try and build up enough life to blow up an Aetherflux reservoir, but I think if you can just hit someone 10 times with mites that are really hard to block because of Delney, you're good to go. If you can proliferate twice every time you hit someone with the Grateful Apparition, you're good to go.
Are you a sicko? What is this?
So, let's make it a toxic deck. It's worth noting Toxic is not a triggered ability or anything, so it doesn't get doubled by Delney. This is specifically using the part of Delney that makes creatures hard to block. If your creature has power 2 or less, it can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. So Annex Sentry, we talked about that. That has Toxic. Core Prowler has Infect. It's a 2/2. When it dies, you proliferate. Except, oh sorry, that's proliferating twice. Crawling Chorus has Toxic 1. When it dies, you make a Might. You make 2 Mights cause of Delney. So even if someone does block that good, your board just got bigger. Duelist of the Deep Faith has First Strike sometimes. Okay, that's fine, I just care that it's power 3 or less and it's got Toxic. Ichor Claw Mirror, I'm sure it does something else, but to me it says it's got Toxic. Indoctrination Attendant is the only creature in this deck with power 3 or greater. When it hits the battlefield, you can return a permanent you control to your hand and create a Might. The reason this is here is, 1, yes, it has Toxic and can swing in for Toxic, but 2, it can help you repeat ETB triggers.
I'm going to throw up.
Jawbone Duelist has Toxic and Double Strike, which means that even though it doesn't get doubled up by Delney, it kinda does. It'll hit you twice and put 2 Toxic counters on. If it gets through, can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. Lost Leonin is just a 2/2 with Infect. I guess it's worth noting if someone does end up blocking it, they'll get -1/-1 counters on their creature, but that creature will also probably die if it's power 2 or less, unless it's like a wall. Mirror Convert, Plague Mirror. I'm sure they do other stuff. They're in here because they have Toxic. Skrelv Defector Might has Toxic 1, and also you can pay a Phyrexian mana and tap it to give a creature you control protection from a color until end of turn, and also give them Toxic. You don't even need mana to do this. You can just pay 2 life. Then finally, just a couple of proliferate triggers. Unbounded Potential lets you proliferate as an instant. And Contagion Clasp lets you pay 4 to proliferate. It's a second Karn's Bastion. It also puts a -1/-1 counter on something as it enters, but like, you know, whatever. It's here to proliferate, because eventually you're gonna have a ton of mana on board because of things like Solemn Simulacrum, Oreskos Explorer, yada yada yada. Card draw, you're never gonna miss a land drop.
It's free real estate.
And you gotta spend it on something. Might as well spend it to proliferate. So that's how I like to build Delney. Again, this is a really flexible commander. You can do a lot of different strategies with it. And I really like that there's always gonna be more Widow Guys being printed in Magic the Gathering. White is a color that excels at doing a lot with little creatures that have really good triggered abilities. Now, if you didn't see the first episode because it wasn't on this channel, we are trying to build 32 decks that have 3,200 or less decks on EDH Rec for a total cost of less than $3,200, which means an average cost of $100, and we went over again today at around $132 at the time of recording. But if you need to make a more budget version of this deck, you can literally just cut Charismatic Conqueror or Esper Sentinel and boom, it's under 100. But I included them in this deck list because we don't have to spend a lot of money on our lands for this deck. When we go further into the series, specifically into the 2-color area, we're gonna have to spend a lot of our budget just on a decent land base. If we're able to get staple cards in our mono-colored decks, we can include them in the bigger decks without having to add them to the total. That's kind of the guiding philosophy for me building these decks in general. Start out with the mono-colored, save money on the lands. You learn more of the mechanics of the game by focusing on what your deck does specifically without having to worry about having a huge interaction suite to deal with everyone else's deck. Your deck is full of your cards that do your thing. Hopefully that means you can do it faster than everyone else. Thanks for watching. This is the first video posted on this channel, but there is another episode in the series where I built Iraxa. If you want to go check that out, that's over on Tulok the Barbarian, the D&D channel. From now on, this is the Magic channel. This is where the magic is going to happen, not over there. That was kind of a mistake posting it over there. Shouldn't have done that. If you liked the video, please subscribe for more. We will be doing more videos on more decks like this, maybe even doing a little fan speculation for some potential universes beyond in the future, if there's interest. Bye.